Well, let's go ahead and get started. For those of you joining us this morning, we are thankful that you were able to make it, and we welcome you to how to build a stronger cyber defense around your business. So my name, just to give you a quick introduction, is Mary. I am with Merit Technologies. Merit Technologies is a full-service MSP and MSSP located in Greenville, South Carolina. We've got a team of IT and security experts, and one of them I actually have with me this morning is James Edwards. James is a part of our VCIO team, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But he is our cybersecurity expert and a licensed CISSP. And what this means is he is a certified information system security professional. So one of the highest levels of certifications that you can receive for cybersecurity. And basically, he knows what he's talking about in summary. So I'm happy to have him with us this morning. And really, the purpose of today's webinar, with October being Cybersecurity Awareness Month, our team wanted to dive into the last year and look at cybersecurity and really understand what was the number one threat for the year of 2022, and what does it mean for businesses, and what can we do to protect against not only the threats this year, but where is cybersecurity going and how can we fight against it? So let's go ahead and dive in with our first question we have today, and it's going to cover what is the number one cybersecurity threat? What was it this year? And talk a little bit more about that one, James.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate the introduction. I thought I was going to float away there with my head getting so big. So thank you so much. It's also interesting we chose today, Halloween, to do this on, because I think sometimes in cybersecurity, we, like you said, this question asked, it's risk management and security. It can get scary sometimes, and we try not to present it as a fearful thing. It's really, we want to educate people. But This is a great question that you've come up with right here, because it's so important and it's growing rapidly. So attack surface expansion, just a kind of a quick high level overview. It's really just I'm going to speak about a business here, I should say. It's kind of the entire area of an organization that can be hacked, and hack is a very generic term. That might be actually somebody enters into the organization. That could be maybe acting upon or having an effect upon information, and that could also be extracting information or data. So there's a lot of ways we kind of define quote unquote hacking in our industry. It's everything that you kind of read in the news has several tiers deep to it once you start getting in there. Yeah. I think the big piece on what we're seeing here, and what makes it number one, is because of the explosion of growth we've had in our acronym is IoT, Internet of Things. So that would include items like your cell phone. We've had those for years. Wearables, watches. If you have a Apple Watch, I mean, I'm wearing my wearable right now. It's always with us. TVs. I mean, so once again, even when we talk organizations, you can translate a lot of what I'm saying probably to, your house as well, and your home. So just how we were talking about with, kids earlier, as we have families and kids, we also try to protect them. A lot of them will have similar devices that we're discussing here. COVID is another big factor, the last few years, because businesses, went, 2-3 years ago, businesses went very mobile. So a lot of people are working remote these days and have that flexibility, even if they have an office. Like I see you're in our office today, which is, great, and it's wonderful to work in the office, but I'm sure, there's, days you probably work at home, on your laptop as well, or you travel,
Right.
So So I think seeing COVID push a lot of people outside the office, more devices connecting, really financial gain is money is another big one in this growth process. Verizon, sorry, this is probably kind of nerdy for us cybersecurity professionals, but every year Verizon does a big breach report, and it's kind of a big deal. A lot of people pay attention to it. So they did one, I believe it was July of this year, they released it. But they found out that 71% of cyber attacks were because of financial gain. And that was the motivator for actually, having that cyber attack. So that's a high percentage.
Right.
And so you're seeing, more money, more things to attack, that's what that equates to. And I think that's the big crux and why it's going there. So our job obviously is not only Merit, but cybersecurity professionals is, we have to manage that risk. You rarely get to zero, but, our goal is to minimize that risk as much as possible, which means minimizing that attack surface.
Right. Right. And if I'm hearing you correctly, an attack surface can be anything from what you're wearing, so your Apple Watch, to a front door and someone walking into a building that has access to other computers, devices, anything like that.
Correct. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. We split it into kind of 3 sections. So that's a really good way to look at it. You're right. There's the device. And so that's kind of what I was mentioning with maybe a laptop, phone, computer, TV. I mean, gosh, you could probably go on and on in devices there, and that is what we call the digital attack surface. So usually that's where you find software vulnerabilities, stuff like that. Then there's also the physical aspect. And this still kind of wraps around a device. But for an example, if your cell phone gets stolen and you're out to eat at a restaurant and, you have your cell phone on the table and you walk away and you leave it, somebody could steal that. And of course, that has valuable information. I mean, now cell phones even store credit card data. People have, Apple Pay, etc. So, contacts. I mean, so it's a way they can, call people and gain information. So once again, there's a bunch of ways like that. Social is the other big aspect, and usually that revolves around people. So that's a lot of what we're commonly hearing in phishing, business email compromise, a lot of the social engineering scams that are well outside of email. I mean, they travel over into a lot of other social media, but that's one that really hits home too, in particular with, not just the professional life, but it's that personal life as well. And really, as a professional organization, we have to be aware of how that personal life blends in with the professional, because a lot of devices are multi-purpose use. I don't know if you got on any of your social media accounts this weekend from your phone, but if you did, you probably have work email on your phone as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so that's a risk in it of itself.
It really is. Yeah. And I think that's, the way we have to look at things. We could I call it the rabbit hole, but you could keep going down that rabbit hole and keep extending it out. Your phone will have specific apps we have to protect from that. So it gets very deep when we talk about attack surface and what all is out there that we're trying to, once again, minimize, that ability for an attacker to, attack an organization.
Right. Well, it is fitting for Halloween because it certainly is kind of scary when you think about it.
Try not to be, but yes, it is. I mean, in some sense, we are at war, and you hate to just say that, with a real war going on in the world that's very physical. There's a huge digital component to that as well. And we really are at that it is nation state.
Yeah.
Hackers, trying to compromise governments and businesses. There are, cyber criminal groups. I mean, you think about the organized crime, mafia, the mob. I mean, they've gotten into organized crime online because it pays well, So, we unfortunately have that constant digital battle, and that's just the state of where we're at right now on the internet.
Well, tell us a little bit about, that being said, what are the top recommendations that businesses can be doing to really defend themselves?
Yeah, that's great. I'll try to speak to a, kind of a high level on this question, and because each business might be a little different. There are probably definitely some core components. A high level is still that layered defense approach, and that means you're going to have several tiers to being defending. When I
Yeah.
say your organization, once again, there's no longer, you can't think about it as a hard outer shell. So it's no
Hmm.
longer, hey, everybody comes into the office and we have a firewall in place and that protects us from the bad guys. People work from home, people will work on the road, as we discussed, hotels,
Right.
coffee shops. So now you're defending much smaller areas like the device, itself. You still have an office to worry about, but you have these broader areas. So no longer is it a hard outer shell. So
Hmm.
that layered defense is what we do. And you made a great analogy earlier about, locking your doors. I mean, that's a way we defend our homes, even though we really don't think about it. You come in at night and you make sure your doors are locked, and you could layer that approach at your house. Might be a great example.
Right.
That some people buy a dog. That's a great deterrent. You might have a dog, you might have two locks, you might have a deadbolt and I don't know what you call it, the little knob lock, but the little other lock on the door. And you might lock both of them. So at that point, now you have two locks and a dog. Maybe you buy a security system. Now you have
Yeah.
four. So you kind of layered that defensive approach that if somebody can pick one lock or even both locks, now they've got a security system sounding and a dog to contend with. So
Right.
we do a very similar approach when it comes to trying to protect, devices and people and accounts. We have these layered approaches. So a layered defense, that's the sum it up. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
ways to tackle that. Really going under even self audits and regular reviews is a great way, because everybody's working, everybody's speed of technology is changing, everybody works fast, stuff is coming at us constantly, and so to just take the time to slow down and just review what's going on in an organization. I mean, that will
Yeah.
be configurations, policies, and procedures. We also want a strong vulnerability management program and patch management program. Um, don't know how many times you might get frustrated or, see, hey, we've got to do patching, so your computer will reboot. Yeah, I see your eyes rolling already. Does that happen to you? And it does. We try to make it as painless as possible, but it's a reality of the world that we have something called Patch Tuesday every month, and most
Right.
large organizations will release patches and their security patches on that Tuesday.
Right.
And so as an organization, we have to be prepared to deploy that out to everything we manage. And,
Right.
and so that's another great way to handle that. That can get very deep in and of itself. So I won't, go too deep there.
Yeah.
Clearly what we're trying to do here, education, training goes a really long way toward our end
Mhm.
users. And two, there's just some basic things companies can do, and there's groups out there that you can kind of look at what their advice is. I call it maybe a best practice, and you
Yeah.
could look at implementing something like that. So those are all
Right.
they're very good, but high level items businesses can certainly look at to do to build stronger defenses.
Yeah, and I think it's great. One of the things I heard from you, which I feel like is applicable to almost everyone that's in their 8 to 5, is just slowing down. And really, I mean, this could apply to, you're going fast, through your email, through your inbox, trying to get to the next thing. And if all your security defenses fail, and at the end of the day, you're the only one that's left to not click on that email, being able to slow down and really say, hey, is this right? Is this email legitimate? Would my boss actually ask me for, X amount of money or whatever it might be? But I think
Oh
that's
yeah.
important.
Oh, absolutely, and it's amazing how good criminals have gotten. I mean, it's a scam. It's a social engineering aspect. One of the examples I love to use since we're kind of discussing this, I know it dovetails a little bit off this question, but it's so true. I don't know if you've bought a car recently, new or used. It really doesn't matter. But have you looked at the amount of mail you get after that? Because you sign documents that basically there's a difference between security and privacy, and I don't know if I want to get into all that right now, but you sign some documents that give up some of your privacy. And so you
Interesting.
all of a sudden get a bunch of marketing stuff. This is one of the funniest things. I wish I would have actually had something to display here, but you'll get all these fake warranties
Hmm.
about covering your car. But if you actually read those, it is amazing to see how it's a legitimate marketing company that's trying to almost scare you into getting a
Yeah.
warranty. It's, you'll be liable, and liable is in big bold, letters, and, it's a $300, for misuse, which is actually a federal government rule, which has nothing to do with the warranty. It has to do with how they mail it. But it's so funny. They put all these things on there to try to almost, like, you think, oh my gosh, I've got to open this and call this number and deal with this. The cyber criminals do the same thing of what you just said. They try to instill that
Hmm.
panic of, oh, I've got to jump on this. I've got to hurry up and do it, because they know that's how our life is. And you're right. That's
Right.
exactly how mistakes happen. So that's a
Hmm.
great point.
Yeah. Well, good. And then as we head into, I mean, we're wrapping up the year with 2 months left. So 2023 is right around the corner. What other cybersecurity trends or threats should businesses be aware of? And, if any, what would be a solid defense against them?
Whew, that's another great question. I think the big ones, as I'm kind of thinking about these, is, of course, I'll start with maybe ransomware. And I know it's funny to say start, and sorry, I'm pausing on whether I wanted to start with that one or not. Ransomware has been around for a long time. So I think that's nothing
Right.
new.
We've
Most
heard the
people have heard
term.
of that. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been mainstream. What you're seeing now, though, is they're expanding on ransomware, you might say. And since it's a very profitable model for criminals, you're still seeing a lot of activity with that. So, what originally happened with ransomware is, somehow they enter into something. I don't know. You click a link, let's say. There's a lot of ways they can enter an organization. So, they would basically encrypt your data so it makes it useless to the company. And they would say, hey, you have to pay us to unencrypt it. Well, companies might pay, they might not. Unfortunately, oftentimes I think companies would pay because it's actually less costly to pay to get back, to business operations. They would just keep it quiet. So cyber criminals did that. Then they kind of moved on from that and said, hey, we could get paid, twice out of this. They call it double extortion. So they said, now they started with the first one and say, hey, we encrypted your data. You need to pay us. And then they would come back a little later and say, well, now you need to pay me so I don't release this data publicly and sell it. And so now they're blackmailing the organization into paying them. So now the organization has to kind of pay twice, if that's a good way to say it. And they got even smarter, and then they have triple extortion. This happened, really started happening a few years ago. An example is a psychology firm out of Texas was attacked, and they encrypted their data. So once again, same thing happened. Had to pay to get their data unencrypted. They had to pay not to be blackmailed. And now the third was they actually went after the individuals. So these medical records
The
of
employees
their
or the
the patients, of the psychological history. They went after the patients because, of course, they had the personal information of the patients.
Wow.
And then they basically said, hey, we're going to release all these psych records publicly unless you pay us. So now that's the triple extortion. So, they've had a lot of ways to make money. So that's ransomware. And I spent a lot of time on ransomware. That, like I said, it's been around. It's still a very big one.
Yeah.
It's still very
not
profitable.
going anywhere.
Correct. Yeah. Some of I say newer ones, once again, some of these have been around too, but they're becoming more prominent. Supply chain attacks. So this is kind of dealing with the third parties. Some past ones of those, that would basically be like somebody, like a vendor, that somebody works with. And that could be software. I mean, it could be physical. It could be a lot of aspects. Years ago, Target was a big kind of example of a supply chain attack where, I don't know if you remember the breach that cost Target, hundreds of millions of dollars. They actually came in through the HVAC vendor. So the criminals compromised HVAC vendor that happened to just work on Target's air conditionings systems, and that's how they got into Target's network to get to their payment cards. So it's like a supply chain. Another big one is SolarWinds. In our technical industry, there's a lot of companies that use SolarWinds. They have some great tools. Years ago, this is a software one in particular. criminals broke into the SolarWinds network and changed a piece of software to have what they call, basically remote access backdoor on it. And basically that went out to all these organizations as a legitimate piece of software. So when 18,000 organizations applied this update, they got that backdoor. And none of them, really figured it out. I mean, there's a few companies that had some tools in place that helped figure it out, which was great. But I mean, it impacted some large companies like Cisco, big networking tech company. I mean, it impacted them, Google. So a lot of companies were impacted, and so I just say that to say, we really have to be careful how we vet our vendors these days, have a very strong third-party vetting system. The 5G, I'll touch on that briefly. There's a big 5G battle going out there with 4G, and everybody has heard, I'm sure, with some of the new phones coming out. That's going to be faster. And so that's more bandwidth, which means more information can travel back and forth, more devices connected. So that gets back to the attack surface expanding. That's going to be a big one. 5G is a newer technology. So they'll probably uncover vulnerabilities in 5G that we were unaware of and could pose issues. Synthetic identities is a newer one. Don't know if you've ever heard of that, but luckily, I know you probably haven't been looking for a job. I know Merritt's a great place to be, but an example of that would be, they will actually have these, I'm going to say they're legitimate companies set up by criminal organizations that are well funded. And they actually will try to recruit people. But during this recruiting process, they might send somebody tainted, Word document to fill out this form or do this. So you're opening these things up on your computer thinking you're going through a legitimate process, and instead you're getting infected. But it's a hybrid approach because it's actually a legitimate company. So it's very hard to detect. The marketing, I know that's something you're familiar with. I mean, this has happened with marketing companies. They cyber criminals have created a marketing company, bought legitimate ad space, legitimate company, so very hard to detect. And then they slip in, what I call tainted ads. And then you land on a site that has one of those ads that'll infect your computer. Wow. And so, kind of wild. And then back to one you said earlier, phishing, business email compromise. I mean, how many emails have you gotten from your CEO that says, hey, I need these gift cards? Right. And so you brought that one up yourself earlier, but it's a great example because it's still going on and it's still very successful. I mean, I think last year they said business email compromise, which is that type, is a $14 million a day business. So if you can make $14 million a day from sitting at home and doing a few hours worth of work, the only thing would keep you not from doing it might be morals, Yeah.
Wow. And wow. I mean, you mentioned, I don't know how many, good ones, if you will, but that's crazy. I mean, that's a lot to really to take in. So that being said, what can companies do going into the new year to make sure that their approach and protection is really proactive? So how can they, be proactive against some of these emerging threats?
Yeah, that's, once again, another group. And this is a good area to compromise. And I think proactive is the word I love that you put in here, because like I said, we don't really want to spread a bunch of, we call it FUD in our industry, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, even though it can be scary. I mean, there has to be a reality of what we're up against, but it's great to talk about what we can do to defend against this. And I often say a defender of an organization is kind of like a great defense in football. It's now football season. People are definitely getting back into that. And the defense, unfortunately, for a defense, we have to be right 100% of the time. Otherwise, that touchdown will happen. And the reality is we know nobody's right 100% of the time. Right. And so, it's not a matter of if, it's when it's going to happen. And that is why you definitely try to be proactive and reduce that risk as much as possible. And one of the initial ways I like to see that happen is, choose a framework or a best practice. And there's a number of them out there. a lot of analogies, NIST, and maybe I won't define all those analogies if that's okay, unless you're interested. But NIST,
I'm always interested, but maybe for the sake of time.
Exactly. CIS, ITIL are all great frameworks that companies and organizations can use to help define cybersecurity. It gives measurements, so that way a company can actually say, hey, are we meeting this, and give a definable measurement. And I think that's a way you can tell that you are succeeding.
Right.
And we never really get there in our industry. Technology is constantly changing and moving, which means cybersecurity has to adjust and move with that. And so I say that, we always have goals, but for some reason the finish line always seems to move. So as long as we're always moving toward our goals and in the right direction, I think that's a positive.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. The cybersecurity awareness training is another great way people can be proactive. The training, the education, like we're doing right now, is fantastic. A small stat from that, back to that Verizon breach report, that in the 2022 report, so this is all fresh information, that 82% of breaches had a human element involved.
Interesting.
So back to your example, Mary, of you getting an email, if you get an email in your inbox, that means it bypassed all the technical defenses that I could put in place. So now it's on you. You are my last line of defense, and really, in some sense, I consider you also my first line of defense in protecting our organization. And what people don't understand too is that when we think about what we're protecting, it's like a spider web. It's a web of interconnected devices like the internet. So I'm not only protecting Merit, but I'm protecting every single device and company that Merit works for or with. Right. And so it continues to grow well out beyond. So that one email landing in your inbox, I have to consider that across the board. And
I mean, that's a good point, like for people and businesses, what they're doing is really impacting how they're able to protect it for their clients. Am I hearing you right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And vendors, I mean, everybody. Yeah. And so it goes both ways up and down the supply chain, is the way a criminal could move. So, just to highlight another couple quick ones, just make sure you have a good disaster recovery plan. Test it. We work with a lot of organizations that say they have one and they've never tested it. You don't want to find out it fails when you need it. Policies and procedures are a great way too. That helps dictate and govern what an organization will do, and having an incident response plan already in place. Because I think once you have that in place, you're not trying to figure out what happens, when it's happening. And that's never a good place to be.
Right. Well, I mean, and I think to the last point we're going to make here, really, that is how Merit, that is our strategy for our positioning for cybersecurity and how we're protecting not only our business, but the clients that we serve, right? Because we just established that that's when you do one, you're doing both, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
So, any other, points you want to make about this question in particular?
Well, the one about the evolving threats, probably not. I mean, if it's the Merit defense, like how does Merit specifically protect businesses?
Yeah,
I'd love to
speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'd love to get into just the more detailed, and these are some, I call it tangible ways. So this is where I feel like we've taken these higher level approaches and added action items to them. Even internally, I often say this, this is stuff we're doing to protect ourselves and the people we work with, not just, saying other people should do it. Security awareness training, we've touched a lot on that. Education and training is so important. We do that internally. We do the phish testing where we send fake emails out to people that work at Merit to try to trick them into clicking on links, teach them along with regular training. I think that's so important. We clearly have a layered approach in what we do. And, we have a good spam filter in place. I think that's, you should have had one for years ago. That's just something that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Multi-factor authentication. Don't know, Mary, if you're I know you're doing this at business. I'm
Right.
hoping this is translated into your personal life.
Yeah. I mean, we were speaking earlier about how things like that used to annoy me. For instance, when Amazon would, make you or ask you if you wanted to add your mobile number or add your email for another layer of security, I was always like, no, I don't want to do that. I mean, that's another step for me to get through, and going back to needing to be patient and slow down. So anyways, it prompted me this past week, and for the first time, I don't know how many months I've been now in working in cybersecurity, was like, absolutely. I was like, yeah, no question. Like, I want to add my mobile number, because that's a way for me to know I'm doing the extra thing to protect myself with the authentication and my information. So it's just one of those things where I think I heard someone say this best the other day, but it takes 7 times for you to either read or say something or see it to really digest it. So that's just, when educating or when helping end users to really understand their risk, that's, something to keep in mind.
Well, that's great to hear. I mean, because you're right. I mean, it's definitely one of those things where, we want to train well and have people actually put it into active use. And that's an easy one. I say it's an easy one. It is an extra step. But most banks, social media platforms all offer it for free now. You just have to enable it.
Right.
And so you're right. It's great to see people do that, even in their personal lives, not just being forced by a business, because it protects everybody better. So multi-factor is that big one that we will always recommend. Some other stuff Merit does is we do store passwords in a password vault. So that adds some additional extra layers of encryption. Gone are the days of writing it down on a sticky note or, having it written out in a Word document or something of that nature. So we definitely try to shy away from that. I think probably the last one, and it's significant, and maybe why I left it to the last is, we are also dealing in what we call the next generation antivirus world. And we use one called Sentinel-1. Don't know whether I can, I guess I can name drop. I just did, but it's definitely considered one of the top, premier ones, and it goes well beyond what a traditional antivirus would do, and even being able to detect, criminal movement inside an organization. And it really goes down to the device level. So once again, we're getting back to protecting the device, because that travels outside the organization. It's great for remote workers. And the piece we like to also add to that is we have our SOC, that's a Security Operations Center, monitoring that. And really that's 24/7. Most businesses we work with, they tell us, I mean, oh, we're 8x5, we're 8x5. And yeah, the door says that. That's what's on the business card glass, whatever it may be. I mean, I think our door even says that, and we know we're really not. The reality is people work all hours of the day. People will come back online at night, at home. People work early in the morning, on the weekends. So sometimes even the computer's just on. You might not be sitting in it, and you just might have it on at home or so at the office. So we feel like that 24/7 Overwatch is really a requirement these days, because criminals don't sleep, and a lot of the attacks are automated, so they're happening all the time. And so we just feel like that's a necessary component this day and age to put on every device an organization has.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, wrapping up today, I appreciate it, James. I think every time we have a conversation about something, but mostly cybersecurity, I feel like I learned something. And it's not just with you, but really our whole team of ECIOs, I feel like, are just a fountain of knowledge. And so we appreciate you taking the time to answer those questions. And if anyone, watching has more questions or wants to really understand the risks that their business is facing when it comes to cybersecurity, and how a team of experts in Merit could really help your positioning with that, we would love to talk more with you. Our number is down here. If you have any, questions or want to contact us through our website too, that's great. We're more than happy to help make sure we get you covered. Anything else? Any closing words, James, you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
I mean, I think we've hit on most of it. I mean, I'd like to just reiterate the training. It's very passionate for me, and I think that's really a smart thing to do. And two, really the stuff I've mentioned right here at the end, high level training, multi-factor, the next gen AV, spam filters. I mean, really those should have already been done years ago. I mean, that was considered best practice, years ago. So if people aren't doing that now, I think they really need to take a serious look at that.
Yeah.
A lot of contractual language, cybersecurity insurance, contractual language with third parties is hinging more on following best practice when it comes to protecting data. So people can really get bit and not realize it. So I think that's a good one. And I think one last thing, I get if people could be watching this that are not part of Merit, then they can, definitely reach out to us. But, if you are part of Merit and you're currently working with us and you're not sure about these items or have more questions, I mean, you can also reach out to, our team directly or the help desk and request information as well. We'll be glad to talk to you.
Right. Great point. Great point. All right. Well, thank you. With that, we will say goodbye to everyone, and we appreciate the time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.